The fever struck Emma Caldwell on the worst possible morning, when the dawn broke cold and unforgiving over the Montana Territory, and 23 cows needed milking before the sun climbed high enough to spoil the cream. Emma had awakened in her narrow bed with her nightgown soaked through with sweat despite the October chill of 1882 seeping through the gaps in the cabin walls. Her head pounded with a relentless ache that made her vision swim, and her body felt as though she had been trampled by the very livestock she tended, but there was no one else to do the work. Her father had died 2 winters past. Her mother had followed him to the grave last spring, and the small ranch outside of Bozeman was all she had left in this world. If she did not milk the cows, they would suffer, and if they suffered, she would lose them. If she lost them, she would lose everything. She dragged herself from bed, her legs trembling beneath her weight, and pulled on her work dress with fingers that felt thick and clumsy. The buttons took 3 times as long as usual, and twice she had to stop and lean against the wall as waves of dizziness crashed over her. But she made it outside eventually, where the morning air bit at her flushed cheeks and the cows lowed impatiently in their stalls. The barn smelled of hay and manure and the warm bodies of animals waiting for her attention. Emma stumbled to the first cow, a gentle brown creature named Bessie, and positioned her milking stool with exaggerated care. Her hands shook as she reached for the udder, and when she began to milk, the rhythmic motion that usually came as naturally as breathing felt foreign and difficult. The metal bucket rang with each stream of milk, the sound echoing too loud in her fevered brain. Sweat dripped down her temples despite the cold. Her hands trembled so badly that she could barely maintain her grip, and twice the bucket nearly tipped over. She managed to finish Bessie and moved on to the next cow, but her movements grew slower and more uncoordinated with each passing minute. The world tilted and swayed around her, and she could not seem to catch her breath. She was halfway through the 3rd cow when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching the barn. Emma tried to focus, tried to turn her head to see who was coming, but the effort made her stomach lurch dangerously. The hoofbeats stopped, and she heard boots hitting the ground, then footsteps approaching. "Miss Caldwell?" a deep voice called out, concern threading through the words. Emma recognized the voice even through the fog of fever. James Hartford, the cowboy who worked the massive Hartford ranch that bordered her small property to the east. She had seen him perhaps a dozen times over the past year, usually from a distance as he rode the fence lines or herded cattle across the rolling hills. He was 26 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of a summer sky. They had spoken only a handful of times, brief exchanges about weather and water rights and the price of cattle, but he had always been unfailingly polite, tipping his hat and calling her ma'am even though she was 3 years his junior. "I am fine," Emma tried to say, but the words came out slurred and weak. Her hand slipped from the cow's udder, and the bucket tipped over, sending precious milk spilling across the barn floor. "Jesus," James breathed. And then he was beside her, his strong hands catching her shoulders as she swayed dangerously on the stool. "Miss Caldwell, you are burning up." "The cows," Emma mumbled, trying to pull away from him even as her body betrayed her by leaning into his solid warmth. "I have to finish the cows." "The hell with the cows," James said firmly. His arm slipped around her waist, taking her weight as he pulled her to her feet. "You need to be in bed." Emma wanted to argue, wanted to explain that she could not afford to neglect her duties, that this ranch was all she had, that she had no one else to rely on. But her tongue felt thick in her mouth, and her legs buckled beneath her. James caught her easily, sweeping her up into his arms as though she weighed nothing at all. "I have got you," he said quietly, and there was something in his voice that made Emma's fevered heart skip a beat. "Just hold on." He carried her across the yard to the cabin, shouldering the door open and bringing her inside. The single room was sparse but clean, with a stone fireplace on one wall and her narrow bed pushed against the other. James laid her down gently on the quilt her mother had made, then stepped back, his expression troubled. "You have got a bad fever, Miss Caldwell," he said. "Do you have any willow bark? Anything for medicine?" Emma tried to think through the haze clouding her mind. "In the cupboard," she managed. "The tin on the second shelf." James moved to the small cupboard and rummaged through it until he found the tin of willow bark tea her mother had always kept stocked. He set about building up the fire and putting water on to boil with the practiced efficiency of a man who had spent years taking care of himself on the trail. Emma watched him through half-closed eyes, her body shivering now despite the fever burning through her. "Why are you here?" she asked. Her voice barely above a whisper, James glanced at her as he measured out the willow bark. "I was riding the fence line and saw smoke from your chimney was weak. Thought I would check if everything was all right." He paused, then added more quietly, "I've been meaning to stop by for a while now, truth be told. Make sure you were managing okay out here on your own." Something warm unfurled in Emma's chest that had nothing to do with the fever. Before she could respond, another wave of chills racked her body, making her teeth chatter. James was beside her in an instant, pulling the quilt up over her shoulders and adding a second blanket from the chest at the foot of her bed. "The cows," Emma said again, the worry gnawing at her even as her body demanded rest. "I will take care of the cows," James promised. He brought her the willow bark tea once it had steeped, supporting her shoulders as she drank the bitter liquid. "You just rest. I will finish the milking and make sure all your stock are tended." "I cannot ask you to do that," Emma protested weakly. "You are not asking. I am offering." James eased her back down onto the pillow, his hand lingering for a moment on her shoulder. "My uncle owns the Hartford spread, and he has got more than enough hands to manage without me for a day. You need help, and I am here to give it." Emma wanted to maintain her pride, to insist that she could manage on her own, as she had been doing for months now, but the fever pulled at her consciousness, dragging her down toward sleep, and the relief of knowing someone would care for her animals was overwhelming. "Thank you," she whispered. James smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "Rest now. I will be back to check on you soon." He left, closing the door quietly behind him, and Emma drifted into an uneasy sleep filled with fevered dreams. When she woke, the light coming through the window had shifted, telling her several hours had passed. Her head still ached, and her body felt wrung out. But the bone-deep exhaustion had eased slightly. She could hear sounds from outside, the familiar noises of ranch work being done. Curiosity drove her to sit up, though the effort made her dizzy, and she shuffled to the window to look out. James was in the corral, forking hay to her small herd of cattle. He had removed his coat and worked in his shirt sleeves despite the October cold, his movements strong and sure. Emma watched him for several minutes, something stirring in her chest that she had not felt in a very long time. She had been alone for so long, carrying the weight of the ranch and her grief and her uncertain future all by herself. Seeing someone else shoulder even a small part of that burden made tears prick at her eyes. She returned to bed before he could catch her watching, pulling the quilts around herself. The willow bark tea had helped somewhat, but she could feel the fever still burning through her veins. She drifted in and out of sleep as the afternoon wore on, sometimes waking to the sound of James working outside, sometimes to the crackling of the fire he must have built up when he checked on her. As the sun began to set, James came back inside carrying a pot that smelled of beef and vegetables. "I made some stew," he said, setting it on the hook over the fire. "Figured you would need something in your stomach besides tea." "You did not have to do that," Emma said, pushing herself up on her elbows. "I wanted to." James ladled stew into a bowl and brought it to her, along with a hunk of bread. "All your stock are fed and watered. The cows are milked, and the milk is in your cold cellar. The chickens are shut up safe for the night." Emma took the bowl with trembling hands, overwhelmed by his kindness. "I do not know how to thank you." "No thanks needed." James pulled the chair from her small table over to the bedside and sat down. How are you feeling? Better than this morning, Emma admitted, though that is not saying much. You should have sent word you were sick. Someone would have come to help. There is no one to send word to, Emma said quietly, staring down at her stew. And even if there were, I could not afford to pay for help. James was silent for a long moment. When Emma glanced up at him, she found him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. You have been managing this place all alone since your mother passed? Emma nodded, not trusting her voice. That is a hell of a burden for anyone to carry, much less someone on their own. James leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Why did you not sell the place? Move into town where things might be easier. Because this is my home, Emma said simply. My father built this ranch with his own 2 hands. My mother kept it running after he died. I cannot just abandon it, even if keeping it means working myself to exhaustion. She paused, then added with brutal honesty, and because I have nowhere else to go. This land and these animals are all I have in the world. The words hung in the air between them, stark and vulnerable. Emma felt her cheeks flush with more than fever, embarrassed at having revealed so much to a man who was practically a stranger. But James did not look at her with pity. Instead, his expression softened with something that looked almost like admiration. You are one of the strongest people I have ever met, Emma Caldwell, he said quietly. And the use of her first name sent a little thrill through her despite her illness. But everyone needs help sometimes. There's no shame in that. Emma ate her stew slowly, savoring the warmth and nourishment, and James stayed beside her, occasionally adding wood to the fire or refreshing her tea. They talked as the evening deepened into night, the conversation flowing more easily than Emma would have thought possible. James told her about his life on the Hartford ranch, how he had come to Montana 3 years ago from Missouri after his parents died in a cholera outbreak. His uncle had taken him in and taught him the cattle business, and James had proven himself capable enough to become the foreman. But it is not my ranch, James said, staring into the fire. I work hard, and my uncle treats me fair. But at the end of the day, I'm still just hired help. Sometimes I think about striking out on my own, finding a piece of land, and building something that belongs to me. That takes capital, Emma said, and luck, and more capital. James laughed, the sound warm and genuine. Truth, which is why I am still working for my uncle. He turned to look at her, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. But seeing what you have done here, keeping this place running against all odds, it makes me think maybe it is possible after all. Emma felt her heart skip again, that same unfamiliar warmth spreading through her chest. She was suddenly very aware of how close James was sitting, how the lamplight played across his features, how his presence made the small cabin feel both smaller and somehow safer. I should let you rest, James said, standing reluctantly. You need sleep to fight off this fever. Will you come back tomorrow? Emma asked before she could stop herself. James smiled. Try and stop me. Someone needs to make sure you stay in bed and do not try to work yourself into the ground again. He left then, and Emma lay back against her pillows, her mind racing despite her exhaustion. She told herself that James was simply being a good neighbor, that his kindness meant nothing more than common human decency. But the way he had looked at her, the gentleness in his touch when he helped her drink the tea, the hours he had spent caring for her ranch without any expectation of payment, all of it spoke to something deeper. Emma drifted off to sleep with a smile on her face for the first time in months. True to his word, James returned the next morning before the sun had fully risen. Emma woke to the sound of him stoking the fire and putting coffee on to boil, and she sat up to find him moving around her cabin with easy familiarity. Morning, he said when he saw she was awake. How are you feeling? Better, Emma admitted. The fever had broken sometime in the night, leaving her weak and wrung out but clear-headed. Much better. Good. But you are staying in that bed for at least another day. James brought her coffee and a plate of biscuits he must have brought from the Hartford ranch. I already tended your stock. Everything is taken care of. Over the next 3 days, James came every morning and stayed until evening, managing all the ranch work while Emma recovered. On the third day, she felt strong enough to get out of bed and move around the cabin, and she insisted on making supper for them both despite James's protests. They ate together at her small table, the domesticity of the scene making Emma's heart ache with longing. It had been so long since she had shared a meal with anyone, so long since she had heard another person's voice in her home. And it was not just anyone, it was James, whose quiet strength and unexpected tenderness had carved out a place in her heart before she even realized it was happening. I need to get back to the Hartford ranch tomorrow, James said as they finished eating. My uncle has been more than patient, but there is work piling up that needs the foreman's attention. Emma tried to hide her disappointment. Of course. You have already done so much for me. I cannot thank you enough. Emma. James reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. I did not do this because I felt obligated. I did this because I wanted to, because I care about what happens to you. Emma's breath caught in her throat. James. I know it might seem sudden, he continued, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. We barely know each other, really, but these past few days being here with you, taking care of you in your ranch, it has felt right in a way nothing else has in a long time. He paused, his blue eyes searching her face. I would like to keep seeing you, if you would allow it. Court you properly, the way you deserve. Emma felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears this time. Tears of relief and joy and hope. I would like that very much, she whispered. James smiled, that brilliant expression that transformed his whole face, and lifted her hand to his lips. The kiss he pressed to her knuckles was gentle and reverent, and Emma felt it all the way down to her toes. Then it is settled, he said. I will come by whenever I can get away from the ranch. And maybe, if you are willing, you could come have Sunday supper with me and my uncle sometime soon. He has been asking about you. He has? Emma asked, surprised. I may have mentioned you once or twice, James admitted, a faint blush coloring his cheeks. Or possibly more than that. He is curious to meet the woman who has captured my attention so thoroughly. Emma laughed, the sound feeling rusty from disuse but genuine. Then I suppose I had better make a good impression. James left late that evening with a promise to return in 2 days, and Emma watched from her doorway as he rode away into the darkness, his figure outlined against the star-filled sky. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart beat strong and steady beneath her palm, and allowed herself to feel something she had not felt in a very long time. Happiness. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Emma had ever experienced. James came to her ranch 3 or 4 times a week, always bringing food or supplies, or simply his presence. They would work side by side during the day, James helping with the heavier tasks that Emma struggled to manage on her own, and in the evenings they would sit by her fire and talk for hours. Emma learned that James loved poetry but was embarrassed to admit it, that he had a beautiful singing voice he only used when he thought no one was listening, that he dreamed of having a family someday, children who would grow up knowing they were loved and wanted. James learned that Emma could shoot better than most men, that she had taught herself to read Latin from her father's old books, that she was terrified of thunderstorms but would never admit it to anyone but him. They also learned how to work together, their movements synchronizing as they fell into an easy rhythm of shared labor. James taught Emma more efficient ways to manage her small herd, and Emma showed James the tricks her father had used to maximize output from limited resources. What had been a burden became lighter when carried together, and Emma found herself looking forward to each day in a way she had not since before her parents died. 6 weeks after that fateful morning when James found her sick in the barn, he brought her to Sunday supper at the Hartford ranch as promised. Emma wore her best dress, a deep blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes, and James looked at her as though she were the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. His uncle, Clayton Hartford, was a gruff man in his 60s with a gray beard and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He looked Emma over carefully when James introduced them, and she held her head high, refusing to be intimidated even though her heart was pounding. "So you are the young woman who has been keeping my foreman distracted," Clayton said, but there was a hint of a smile beneath his stern expression. "I apologize if I have interfered with his work, sir," Emma said politely. Clayton snorted. "Interfered? Girl, he comes back from your place working twice as hard and with half the complaints. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." He turned to James. "She will do." James grinned. "I am glad you approve, Uncle." The supper was delicious, a feast of roasted beef and potatoes and fresh bread, and Emma found herself relaxing as the evening wore on. Clayton was gruff but kind, and he clearly cared deeply for his nephew. He told Emma stories about James's first days on the ranch, how he had been thrown from an ornery Mustang 7 times before finally managing to stay in the saddle, and James groaned and tried to change the subject while Emma laughed. As James drove her home in the wagon later that night, Emma felt more content than she had in years. The November air was cold and crisp, the stars brilliant overhead, and James's warmth beside her kept the chill at bay. "My uncle likes you," James said as they neared her ranch. "I like him too," Emma said honestly. "You are lucky to have family." James was quiet for a moment. "He told me tonight that he is thinking about retiring in a few years, turning the ranch over to me completely." Emma turned to look at him in surprise. "James, that is wonderful." "It is," James agreed, "but it is also a lot of responsibility. Running a ranch that size, managing all those men and cattle, it is not something a man should do alone." He brought the wagon to a stop in front of her cabin and turned to face her fully. "Emma, I know we have only been courting for a short time, but I need you to know that I'm serious about you, about us. I am not looking for a passing fancy or a casual flirtation. I am looking for a partner, a wife." Emma's heart hammered in her chest. "James—" "I am not proposing tonight," James said quickly. "I know it is too soon for that. But I needed you to know my intentions. I am courting you because I am falling in love with you, Emma Caldwell, and I want to build a future with you." Emma felt tears slide down her cheeks, but she was smiling through them. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I did not think I would ever feel this way about anyone, but you came into my life when I needed someone most, and you have shown me nothing but kindness and strength and understanding. I want that future too, James. I want it more than anything." James cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears, and kissed her. It was sweet and tender and full of promise, and Emma leaned into him, her hands clutching the front of his coat. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless. "I should go inside," Emma said reluctantly. "I should let you," James agreed, but neither of them moved. They kissed again, longer this time, and Emma felt warmth bloom through her entire body. When James finally pulled away, his eyes were dark with emotion. "Soon," he promised. "I will make this official soon. I just want to do it right." Emma nodded, not trusting her voice, and James walked her to her door. She watched him ride away, her fingers pressed to her lips, already counting the hours until she would see him again. Winter settled over Montana territory with its characteristic ferocity, bringing snow and bitter cold that made ranch work twice as difficult. But Emma found that even the harshest weather seemed manageable with James by her side. He came to her ranch every day that he could, often staying late into the evening to make sure she had enough firewood stacked and her animals were secure against the cold. On Christmas Eve, James arrived at her cabin with a small pine tree strapped to his saddle and a determined expression on his face. "What is this?" Emma asked, laughing as he dragged the tree inside. "Every home should have a Christmas tree," James said firmly. He set it up in the corner and helped Emma decorate it with strings of popcorn and dried berries and small candles. When they were finished, they stood back to admire their work, and Emma felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I did not think I would celebrate Christmas this year." James pulled her into his arms, and Emma rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "You will never spend Christmas alone again," he promised. "Not as long as I am around." They exchanged small gifts. Emma had knitted James a warm scarf in secret over the past weeks, and James gave her a beautiful leather journal with her initials tooled into the cover. "For recording your thoughts," he explained, "or recipes, or ranch records, or whatever you want. I just thought you should have something nice that is yours." Emma clutched the journal to her chest, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It is perfect," she whispered. As the candles on the tree burned low and the fire crackled in the hearth, James pulled a small box from his pocket. Emma's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a simple gold ring with a small diamond that glittered in the firelight. "I know I said I would wait," James said, dropping to one knee in front of her. "But Emma, I cannot wait any longer. I love you. I love your strength and your stubbornness and your kindness. I love the way you face each day with determination, even when everything seems impossible. I love working beside you and talking with you and simply being near you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, building something together. Will you marry me?" Emma was crying again, but she did not care. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking on the word. "Yes, James, of course I will marry you." James slipped the ring onto her finger and stood, pulling her into a kiss that stole what little breath she had left. Emma wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the love and hope and joy that filled her heart. They were married in early February of 1883 in the small church in Bozeman, with Clayton Hartford and a handful of neighbors in attendance. Emma wore a simple white dress that had belonged to her mother, carefully preserved in a trunk, and James wore his best suit. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed her with such tenderness that Emma forgot anyone else was even in the room. Clayton gave them the use of a small house on the Hartford Ranch property as a wedding present, a cozy 2-room cabin that was much larger and sturdier than Emma's old place. They moved Emma's few possessions and combined their households, and for the first time since her parents died, Emma felt like she truly had a home again. The first months of marriage were an adjustment as they learned to live together to navigate the small conflicts and compromises that came with sharing a life. But more than that, they were filled with joy. Emma woke each morning to James beside her. His arm draped across her waist, and fell asleep each night listening to him breathe. They worked the Hartford Ranch together during the day, James in his role as foreman and Emma helping wherever she was needed, and in the evenings they retreated to their little cabin where the rest of the world fell away. Emma also found herself becoming part of a larger community. The other ranch hands and their families welcomed her warmly, and she developed friendships with the women who lived on neighboring spreads. It was a stark contrast to the isolation she had known, and Emma embraced it gratefully. In the spring, Clayton Hartford made good on his word and officially signed over half the ranch to James, with the understanding that he would inherit the other half when Clayton passed. James came home that evening with the deed in hand, his eyes bright with emotion. "We are ranch owners," he said, sweeping Emma up in his arms and spinning her around. "Half of one of the biggest spreads in Montana Territory belongs to us." Emma laughed, dizzy with happiness and motion. "What will we do with such a grand estate? Run it well, make it prosper, fill it with children and cattle and happiness." James set her down but kept his arms around her. "Build the life we both dreamed of." "I like the sound of that," Emma said, stretching up to kiss him. That summer, Emma discovered she was pregnant. She told James one evening as they sat on the porch of their cabin watching the sun set over the mountains, and he was so overcome with joy that he could barely speak. He pulled her close and held her for a long time, his hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. "Are you happy?" Emma asked softly. "Happy does not begin to cover it," James said, his voice rough. "Emma, you have given me everything I ever wanted. A home, a purpose, a future, and now a child?" He shook his head in wonder. "I must be the luckiest man alive." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and James was attentive to the point of being overprotective. He insisted Emma stop doing the heavier ranch work, much to her frustration, and hovered anxiously whenever she so much as stumbled. But Emma could not be truly annoyed with him, not when she saw the love and concern in his eyes every time he looked at her. In early March of 1884, Emma went into labor. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when Emma was certain she could not continue. But James stayed beside her the entire time, holding her hand and wiping her brow and murmuring encouragement. And finally, as dawn broke over the Montana landscape, their son was born. They named him Samuel after Emma's father, and he was perfect. James held his son with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face, and Emma watched them together, feeling such overwhelming love that she thought her heart might burst. "Thank you," James whispered, bending to kiss Emma's forehead. "Thank you for this gift, for everything." "We made him together," Emma said softly, reaching up to touch James's face. "He is ours." Samuel grew into a healthy, boisterous child who had his mother's determination and his father's easy smile. The ranch prospered under James's management, and Emma proved herself an invaluable partner in running the operation. They made decisions together, pooling their knowledge and experience, and the Hartford Ranch became known throughout the territory as one of the best-run operations in Montana. 2 years after Samuel's birth, Emma gave birth to a daughter they named Charlotte. She had James's blue eyes and Emma's dark hair, and she was as fearless as her older brother. The little cabin that had once seemed spacious became cramped with 2 children, and James and Clayton worked together to build a larger house closer to the main ranch buildings, a proper home with multiple bedrooms and a kitchen large enough for Emma to cook the big meals she loved to prepare. Clayton Hartford passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1887, leaving the entire ranch to James. It was a bittersweet transition, the grief of losing a beloved uncle tempered by the pride of fully inheriting the legacy he had helped build. They buried Clayton on a hillside overlooking the ranch, and James stood at the grave for a long time, Emma's hand in his while Samuel and Charlotte played quietly nearby. "He would be proud of you," Emma said softly, "of everything you have accomplished, everything we have built together." "I hope so," James said. He turned to look at her, this woman who had become his entire world, and smiled despite his grief. "I could not have done any of this without you, Emma. You are my partner in every sense of the word. The ranch, our children, our life, it is all because we found each other." Emma leaned her head against his shoulder. "We were both so alone when we met. I think we saved each other." "I think you are right," James agreed. He looked out over the ranch, the vast acreage that stretched in every direction, the cattle dotting the hills, the buildings they had improved and expanded, the life they had created from nothing. "We have come a long way from that morning I found you sick in the barn." "You carried me to bed and finished my chores," Emma said with a smile. "That was the moment I started falling in love with you, I think, when I realized you were someone who helped without expecting anything in return." "I got everything I could have hoped for and more," James said. He kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Emma Hartford, now and always." "And I love you." They stood together on the hillside as the sun set, painting the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson, their children playing at their feet and their future stretching bright before them. The ranch that Emma had once struggled to maintain alone now thrived under their joint stewardship, a testament to hard work and partnership and love. In the years that followed, Samuel and Charlotte grew into capable young people who loved the ranch as much as their parents did. Samuel was steady and reliable, learning the cattle business from his father with dedication and natural talent. Charlotte was spirited and clever, insisting on learning to rope and ride as well as any cowboy despite the raised eyebrows of some of the older hands. Emma and James added a 3rd child to their family, another son they named Thomas, and the house filled with the sounds of children laughing and arguing and growing. Emma taught all three of them to read and write and do figures, determined that they would have the education she had cobbled together on her own. James taught them to ride and work cattle and take pride in honest labor. The Hartford Ranch became one of the most successful operations in Montana, and James and Emma became pillars of their community. They helped neighbors in times of trouble, employed good men at fair wages, and built a reputation for integrity that spread throughout the territory. When Montana achieved statehood in 1889, James was invited to the celebrations in Helena, and he brought his entire family, proud to be part of this new chapter in history. Through it all, the love between Emma and James only deepened. They faced challenges together: harsh winters, cattle diseases, financial downturns, the occasional conflict with neighboring ranchers. But they always emerged stronger for having weathered the storm side by side. In quiet moments, they would steal away to the porch of their house and sit together watching the sunset, James's arm around Emma's shoulders, and marvel at the life they had built. "Do you ever think about that morning?" Emma asked one evening when they were in their 40s, the children grown and starting families of their own. "When I was sick and you found me?" "All the time," James admitted. "I think about how easily we could have missed each other. If I had not ridden the fence line that day, if I had not seen your weak chimney smoke, if I had decided to mind my own business and ride on." He shook his head. "We could have lived our entire lives alone, never knowing what we were missing." "But we did not," Emma said firmly. "We found each other, and we built something beautiful." "That we did," James agreed. He pulled her closer, and Emma rested her head on his shoulder the way she had done countless times over the years. "That we did." As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Emma felt a profound sense of contentment wash over her. Her life had not been easy, but it had been full. She had known loss and loneliness, but she had also known love and partnership and the deep satisfaction of creating something meaningful. The ranch spread out before them, prosperous and thriving, a legacy they would pass on to their children and grandchildren. And at the center of it all was James, the cowboy who had carried her to bed when she was sick and finished her chores without being asked, who had seen her at her weakest and chosen to stay, who had loved her through every season of their lives together. He was her partner, her love, her home. Emma took James's hand, their fingers intertwining automatically after so many years, and smiled as the last light faded from the sky. Their story had begun with an act of simple kindness on a cold October morning, and it had grown into a lifetime of love and shared purpose. It was not the life either of them had planned, but it was better than anything they could have imagined. Together, they had built a home. Together, they had raised a family. Together, they had turned two lonely souls into one unbreakable partnership. And together they would face whatever years remained, secure in the knowledge that they had found in each other everything they would ever need. The Montana wind whispered through the pine trees, carrying the scent of grass and cattle and home, and Emma and James sat together in perfect contentment, their love as enduring and vast as the western landscape that surrounded them. They had weathered every storm, celebrated every triumph, and grown old together in the life they had carved from the wild frontier. And as the stars wheeled overhead in the endless sky, two hearts beat as one, bound together by a love that had begun with shaking hands and fevered brow and had grown into something eternal and unshakable. Their happily ever after was not a fairy tale ending, but a daily choice, made and remade through years of partnership and devotion, a testament to the power of kindness, commitment, and love in the wild heart of the American West.